shutting down by 1955. And then the successes of the agencies. The percentage of the rural population with electricity increased from 4% to around 20% by the early 1940s. Before the PRRA, nearly all rural areas had no access to electricity. Housing. The PRRA constructed over 3,000 homes and began urban slum clearance projects. Agricultural reform. The PRRA acquired approximately 40,000 acres of land for redistribution to poor farmers. And employment at its peak, the PRRA provided jobs to over 30,000 Puerto Ricans, and they built over 1,000 miles of roads and thousands of bridges. And then here is the infrastructure growth from the 1920s to the 1950s. And this is the electrification rate from the 1920s to the 1950s. And I believe the overall effect of the administration was good. Although being shortcut in 1955, I believe that the administration created a blueprint for the Puerto Rican market going forward. I believe although the percentage of land redistributed was minuscule, the effect it had on the future redistribution of land for agriculture was nothing but positive, especially after the U.S. pulled the rug. The roads and infrastructure created during the PRRA's run was nothing but a success. I believe if the administration was funded for just 15 more years, that Puerto Rico would be an even greater territory for the U.S. and would be even more useful for imports and agricultural use. But I do believe the rug pull was a smart move, just administered too early. Overall, I wholeheartedly support the creation of Puerto Rico Reconstruction Administration. And that's it.
Okay. All right, anybody else got ready to present, or are we going on? Okay. All right. Yeah. You can just,
And I'll
yes.
take care of the test today.
And since she's rarely here, where she wants to present her project,
She did it, she really did.
okay, did she get full marks?
Yes, well, I made the comments in the email.
Here, I'll just come back here in a second now.
Okay, yeah, that's cool.
All right, okay, here's the deal. You pay attention, you get credit. If you're on your phone or on a Chromebook or sleeping, you get 0. It's either 20 or an A. So,
Okay, so we are not on the phone.
Yep. So hey, all you gotta do is watch. And by the way, this is interesting because Hitler was a really jacked up person.
Adolf Hitler is the very personification of evil.
Hitler is the most genocidally evil dictator that there ever was.
He is responsible for the deaths of 6 million Jews, hundreds of thousands of Slavs, gypsies, homosexuals, and people with mental and physical disabilities.
The screams, the horror of men, women, and children piled on top of one another. Horror scenes worse than Dante's Inferno would be enacted.
This is the story of a man so diabolical, he convinces a nation of sophisticated, civilized people to be complicit in his sickening crimes.
Planned, organized, industrial scale destruction of a whole people. That is new. That is something horrifically new.
And how a man born like any other can turn into the most malevolent dictator the world has ever seen. As As soon as the Soviets break through the German front in early 1945, the outcome of World War II is clear. The Nazi Führer, Adolf Hitler, knows defeat is inevitable. Even so, on January 30th, the 12th anniversary of his assumption of power, he makes one last public address.
I expect every German to do this duty to the last, and that he be willing to take upon himself every sacrifice he will be asked to make.
For 10 minutes, Hitler warns his people that after the war, the European nations would not be able to withstand Bolshevism, and calls on them to rise up against the Soviets, even if it means all of Germany will come crumbling down.
It was a Samson who wanted to pull down the pillars of the temple upon him.
For the Führer, he and the German state are one. What he wants, it wants, and if he dies, it must die too. So Hitler orders his men to carry out the Nero Decree, the destruction of his country's infrastructure as a punishment for its defeat. Yet the lingering question to this day is not that this madman is losing the war, but how someone who holds such deranged views came to power in the first place. In the spring of 1889, in a small apartment in Braunau on the Inn, Austria, a town near the German border, Adolf Hitler is born. The fourth of what will be 6 children for this devout Roman Catholic family. Young Adolf is quickly acquainted with death as he witnesses 3 brothers and a sister die in infancy. Then there's his father, Alois.
He was someone who would come back home having had a drink and would be violent, would be abusive. He didn't spare the rod. He thrashed Hitler, teaching him from very early on that might was right and that strength and brutality were allied to domination.
In 1900, Hitler moves to Linz and enters high school, where he is introduced to a doctrine that will influence him his entire life. It will give him a sense of purpose he never had.
He had a history teacher called Leopold Kuch, who was fired up with the idea of German nationalism.
Austria is part of a vast empire with ancient roots. Germany is then a newly created country, dating from just 1866. Both peoples speak the same language, and a radical idea is dawning that the two should become one.
It was melding together extreme nationalism and patriotism to make a person believe in their country passionately and be part of their racial community. Hitler took that idea that the Germans should be united together in this kind of pan-German, greater German Reich.
In 1907, at just 16 years old, Hitler leaves school for the Austrian capital Vienna, one of Europe's greatest cities. The young Hitler is armed with a thick set of drawings, determined to train at the prestigious Academy of Arts. Over 100 candidates apply. 28 are to be chosen.
He submits drawings. These are examined. In the notes that they left the examiners, they say reasonable drawings, heads very poorly done, no great talent. We do not recommend admission.
Rejection is followed by deep personal loss.
Now, if he'd have gotten into art school, how different would history be?
When his mother, Clara, dies of cancer. Then comes a final blow. He's rejected by the Academy again.
The second rejection is the more disturbing one because this was absolute now. He had no chance of returning.
Hitler plunges into a deep depression. he makes no attempt to find a job and joins the multitude of men out of work. Finally, he ends up in a homeless hostel, an experience that will brutalize him forever.
I owe it to that period that I grew hard and am still capable of being hard.
To survive, he sells pictures of Viennese buildings, and he also becomes a close observer of politics. He is repelled but fascinated by the growing socialist movement.
He really thought unless the right can find an antidote to this, we're going to have a communist world.
He's especially intrigued by one of their tactics.
What did influence him was the way that the socialists used violence on the streets to make sure that they got their point across.
I achieved an equal understanding of the importance of physical terror toward the individual and the masses.
Other observations start stirring in Hitler's head. Vienna in 1910 has a huge Jewish population. More than 175,000 Jews living in the city, and Hitler starts to loathe them.
Wherever I went, I now saw Jews, and the more I saw, the more sharply they set themselves apart in my eyes from the rest of humanity. I had ceased to be a weak-kneed cosmopolitan and became an anti-Semite.
At a mere 21 years of age, the main building blocks of the Nazis' evil ideology are coming together. Intense personal hardness, extreme nationalism, a belief in the use of violence and terror, and a loathing of Jews.
Vienna was and remained for me the hardest, though most thorough school of my life. In it, I obtained the foundations for a political view which never left me.
Then, in August 1914, comes an event that will affect Hitler and all German-speaking peoples in a most horrific way. World War I. At 25, he apparently joins the cheering crowds on the first day of the war.
There's a famous photo of him in the midst of a crowd in the audience perhaps grinning broadly at the announcement that war had broken out.
Smiling because he really thinks that Germany can make its bid for European power and he wants to be part of it, and on that very day he signs up to fight for the German army.
The young German nationalist, Adolf Hitler, joins a Bavarian infantry regiment as a messenger. His job is to take vital information up to the front line. But in 1918, his luck runs out.
See that big mustache he had? The reason he shaved off and went with a little short mustache, it got bigger. He had the big handlebar ones with the little curly cues. When he put his gas mask on, it actually held his gas mask off, and he had burn marks on the side of his face. He almost died. So that's why he went for the short mustache.
At the Battle of Ypres, he's blinded by a British poison gas attack.
Usually, when a soldier is particularly affected by that attack, he is blinded, but the blindness goes away in a few hours or days.
But strangely, Hitler's eyesight doesn't return. His doctors can't understand it. One story goes they ask a leading German psychologist, Edmund Forster, to take a look at it. Forster concludes that his blindness is hysterical, not physical. He prescribes that the only way to cure Hitler is to boost his ego. Forster hypnotizes Hitler and tells him that he is blind, but as God has made him an exceptional person, he can regain his eyesight again through sheer willpower.
Hitler would have learned that despite his humble rank and his humble background, he was a special being. And the idea that he had been singled out by destiny for a special role in history.
Forster allegedly tells Hitler that he is the person who can make Germany great again. It's a message that Hitler takes to heart. He is not like other men. Forster then holds a lit candle in front of Hitler's eyes and says that if he can see the flame, he's cured. The mind game works. Hitler's vision returns, and he becomes convinced he's a man of destiny. At the end of World War I, Corporal Adolf Hitler finds himself in a hospital bed when he hears some devastating news.
He said a trembling pastor came in and said Germany had surrendered. The war was over, Germany had lost.
Everything went black again before my eyes. There followed terrible days and even worse nights. In these nights, hatred grew in me. Hatred for those responsible for this deed.
Convinced he's a man of destiny, Hitler makes a promise to himself.
When I was confined to bed, the idea came to me that I would liberate Germany, that I would make it great. I knew immediately that it would be realized.
By 1919, the 30-year-old Hitler returns to a Munich ravaged by war. He believes that Germany only surrendered because it had been betrayed by left-wing politicians, many of whom were Jews, who plotted to ensure Germany's defeat.
Now, is any of that true? You gotta understand, at this point, there were only a few countries in Europe that were good to the Jews, and Germany was not one of them. Poland and Denmark were really good to the Jews. Other than that, not so much.
Viewed that armistice in 1918 as a stab in the back for the German military and had been done, in his mind, by the politicians of the centre and crucially by the Jews.
True to his vow to make Germany great again, he drifts into a fringe political party, the German Workers' Party. They have no members of parliament and only a few hundred supporters, but they do have rousing meetings in beer halls. He loves their communist-bashing rhetoric and their hatred of the Jews. The party members quickly notice Hitler's passion as a speechmaker and enlist him as their propaganda chief.
Within a year, it becomes known as the National Socialist German Workers' Party, what we now call the Nazi Party, and Adolf Hitler is its leader.
Once in charge, Hitler starts to apply one of the lessons he learned in Vienna. Violence works. He forms a paramilitary organization made up largely of disgruntled ex-soldiers like himself, his so-called brown shirts, or stormtroopers.
The Nazis.
Now, he takes the term brown shirts because black shirts was taken. However, when he creates his own secret police when he gets in power, they have black shirts. So they can stop them.
Paramilitaries were prepared to commit acts of buggery and even of murder.
You got really confused during the war because you have three paramilitary groups. You have the brown shirts, which were a political group. They were Nazis. Then you have the black shirts, which are military and Nazis. And then you have the regular military, which wore gray.
And this, of course, accorded very much with Hitler's own philosophy of force and violence.
At this stage, Hitler's aim is to seize power by force, not election. So in 1923, he attempts a coup. With his 600 stormtroopers, he takes over a beer hall in Bavaria, where the state prime minister, Gustav von Kahr, is holding a meeting. As he enters the building, he fires a shot into the ceiling and declares a national revolution. Then he marches into Munich to seize power. The state police have been alerted and open fire. "14 Nazis are killed. Only wounded, Hitler manages to escape. But 3 days later, he's arrested and sentenced to 5 years for treason. It looks like he's finished. Prison turns out to be a time of reflection for the future Führer. It's a chance to turn his extreme views into something that resembles a coherent political program. With his fellow Nazi Rudolf Hess taking dictation, he writes a book that will be read the world over, Mein Kampf. It's Adolf Hitler's blueprint for a new world order.
Mein Kampf, the seminal book of the Nazi movement and of Hitler personally, a kind of mixture of autobiography and political manifesto. It is the key document, since all his ideas are there.
Okay, just letting you know, Hitler was a great speaker. He was also a great writer. Now, that's not to say that the stuff that he wrote wasn't trash. I mean, you could write beautifully and still have really crappy ideas. Does that make sense? But he would bring people in because he was such a great, powerful speaker. Does that make sense? Right. One of the books that he read that changed his life is a book that most people kind of blow off. If you've ever heard of Barnum and Bailey circuses, P.T. Barnum wrote a book on how to put on a show. And when you see him get powered, everything is big, these big, huge rallies. He put on a show, and it made a difference.
Hitler talks about how Germany is a racially superior nation. It's an idea that comes from a bastardized version of Charles Darwin's concept of the survival of the fittest. He claims that all true Germans belong to a race whose blood is stronger than that of all other peoples, the Aryans. Proof of the Aryan superiority would be their ability to dominate other peoples.
He very much identified the Aryan idea with the modern Germans. They were supposed to have physical characteristics such as blonde hair, blue eyes. They were supposed to be tall and manly.
Nature knows no political boundaries. She puts living creatures on this globe and watches the free play of forces. The stronger must dominate and not blend with the weaker, thus sacrificing his own greatness.
They were the people who were going to be the master race in Nazi Germany, and everybody else was coming lower down the pecking order. And God help you if you were near the bottom.
To no surprise, in Hitler's deranged universe, the Jews are the people at the bottom, as he refers to them, as a cancer eating away at pure Germanness.
The Jews were prominent, and they were involved in finance, so banking and the loan system was tied up with Jews. Very easy there for a bankrupt nation, bankrupt in money and in ideas, to turn on the Jews as the obvious explanation.
The personification of the devil as the symbol of all evil assumes the living shape of the Jew.
He denounces the Jews as the agents of Germany's downfall, as an inherently corrupt enemy within who must be destroyed, must be eliminated.
Anti-Semitism is nothing new in Germany or Austria, but Hitler takes extremism to extremes. Even in the early 20s, he is explicitly writing about his desire to wipe the Jews off the face of the earth.
He talks about Jews being held under poison gas. So this is a very, very chilling precursor of the actuality which came to pass 20 years later with the actual Holocaust.
Hitler argues that the Aryan racial superiority should drive his foreign policy. First, they should be allowed to take back all territory that was taken from Germany at the end of World War I and rebuild the army to become the most powerful in Europe. Then he goes further.
One of the most sinister ideas advanced in Mein Kampf was the idea of Lebensraum, the German word for living space.
In Hitler's view, the Germans have the right to seize land from the racially weaker peoples. This means the Slavs, in particular, the Russians.
Where was space to be found? In the east. The million square miles stretching across into Russia. That's where Germany must expand.
By the time Hitler leaves prison, he adds one other extraordinary idea to his set of beliefs. He is not just an exceptional person. He has become the Messiah. At a celebration in 1926, he announces to his friends that he will complete the work that Christ had begun, but had been unable to finish. He even claims that he is visited by an almighty power who tells him that he has been chosen as Germany's savior. One day, this belief will be shared by others.
There are churchmen